Richard I, aka Richard the Lionheart, was King of England back in the 12th century. He was the third of 5 sons born to King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. But here's the kicker. This King of England couldn't actually speak English. Why? Because he barely even lived in England. Richard spent most of his time in France, doing kingly things over there, so he never really picked up the language of the people he ruled. His profile claims he tries to keep this little detail down low, but let's be real, it's way too famous to keep it a secret. That was the irony of Richard I, who recently made his debut in FGO-JP, a King of England who couldn't speak English. And that brings us to what we're doing today. There are a lot of hilarious ironies about some of the characters in FGO, and I thought it'd be fun to share a few. Of course, with so many characters, I can't cover everyone, so I've picked the ones I find the funniest. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a part 2 later. Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova was the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, the autocratic ruler of Russia during World War I. Her family's downfall came from a mix of Nicholas II's poor leadership during the war and the public's growing distrust of Grigory Rasputin. A year later, 17-year-old Anastasia was executed alongside her entire family by Bolshevik troops. Anastasia was shot along with her sisters, but due to her connection with V, she remained conscious enough to experience her body being dismembered, burned, and buried, even after her initial death. It was a horrifying end for an innocent princess. In Lost Belt Russia, Anastasia was first summoned by Kadok Zemlupus as a caster. In short, she was our enemy. When we, as masters, confronted Kadok, one of our own servants, Billy the Kid, a gunslinging archer, fired at him. In a moment of loyalty, Anastasia leaped in to shield Kadok. Yes, she jumped to protect the one person she loved, only to be killed once again by a gunshot. Well, that was pretty heartbreaking irony, but I did say this video is about hilarious irony, isn't it? See, the humor doesn't start there. If you manage to summon Anastasia in the game and want to level up her skills, you'll need a specific material, mystical bullets. And not just a few, you'll need 72 of them for each skill. That's a total of 216 bullets to max her out. See the irony? It's like the developers have a twisted sense of humor when it comes to her character. Poor Anastasia, shot in life, shot in death, and now metaphorically shot again just to reach her full potential in-game. Speaking of unfortunate ladies, that reminds me of Barghest. She's one of the fairy knights serving Queen Morgan in Lost Belt Britain. If you didn't know, Barghest is a huge fan of the Knights of the Round Table. She admires them so much that if you summon her in Chaldea, she totally fangirls over Gawain. She especially loves his strong, muscular build and, well, his noble heart. But life does be hilarious sometimes. In Lost Belt 6, early on, we're exploring the area with Tristan, and that's when we run into Barghest. And guess what? The first time Barghest meets Tristan, she straight up calls him a mindless puppet and kills him, completely clueless that he's one of her idols. Yeah, the irony is strong with this one. You idolize a group of heroes, worship them, hold them in the highest regard, and then, one day, you end up mocking one of them and even killing them, all without realizing who they really are. Later, when she's summoned to Chaldea and learns the truth, she's absolutely horrified by what she said and did to him. But that's just the start of her irony. In Avalon Le Fay, Barghest hopes to make her domain, Manchester, a shining example for all of Fairy Britain, a place where fairies and humans can live together as equals in peace. Sounds great, right? Well, things take a dark turn. She loses control of her curse, ends up eating her human lover while her fairy subjects secretly watch, and then gets brainwashed to forget it ever happened. Meanwhile, the fairies of Manchester are anything but peaceful. They've been secretly torturing, killing, and eating their human neighbors for fun. By the time the final calamity hits, they fully embrace their worst nature, the kind of demons humans fear most. And instead of repenting, they're hyped about escaping to proper human history so they can start abusing humans there too. So yeah, from her wish to create the perfect example of harmony, unintentionally, Barghest ends up creating the absolute worst place to be human in all of Britain. But Barghest's irony doesn't stop there. In Avalon Le Fay, she's actually responsible for setting multiple fires as the story unfolds. Then comes her summer version. And guess what? Her noble phantasm turns her into a firefighter. Yep, her NP literally cleanses any fire debuffs on enemies. She also has a passive skill that charges her NP when fighting on a burning battlefield. That was definitely interesting, but let me talk about her one more time. Not that I'm obsessed with her or anything. Barghest has a clear rivalry with Melusine and really wants to be seen as her equal, but Melusine is considered stronger. Now, gameplay-wise though, Barghest has the class advantage against her, and thanks to her tanky stone wall playstyle, she's more likely to win in a proper fight, at least for me. Now, moving on to another ironic situation, let's talk about Atalante. Her irony is pretty wild if you think about it. If you remember Fate Apocrypha, she developed this intense grudge against Jeanne d'Arc over how she thought Jeanne treated children. She was so mad she couldn't let it go, and by the final battle, Atalante went all out, using the demonic boar pelt to activate Agrius Metamorphosis, giving herself mad enhancement. Yeah, it didn't end well. She kinda got over it before her death, feeling regret and all that. But in the Orleans chapter, guess who summoned her? Jeanne d'Arc Alter. Basically an edgy, villainous version of Jeanne d'Arc, the very person who pushed Atalante into madness in the first place. And as if fate hadn't already mocked her enough, Jeanne Alter went ahead and forced Atalante into mad enhancement again. Just because she could. Yeah, that's pretty effed up, but also funny. Let's move on to another archer, everyone's favorite king of heroes, Gilgamesh. His archer version is kinda legendary in the Fate franchise for holding back during fights, mostly because he loves toying with his opponents. And well, that cockiness always comes back to bite him. In every route of Fate Stay Night, he ends up getting killed because he just doesn't try hard enough. Now, fast forward to the Babylon Singularity, and we meet the older Gilgamesh. This time is the total opposite. He works himself to death, literally. Between running Uruk, leading a three-front war, and micromanaging everything, the guy straight up dies from stress and overwork. So you see, Archer Gil dies for not trying hard enough, and Caster Gil dies because he tried way too hard. Bro, the irony. Thankfully, he gets better because the metaphysics of the underworld are a thing, and Fujimaru pulls his soul back to life for a one-time only deal. Speaking of the king of heroes, Gilgamesh reminds me of another guy from the Fate series who's just as ironic, Kiritsugu Emiya. Back when he was alive, the dude was known as the Magus Killer. His whole deal was being a mercenary who took out mages for a living. Pretty badass, right? But here's the kicker. When he gets summoned in FGO, it's as an assassin. And guess which class has an advantage against him? Casters. Yup. The one class that literally specializes in magic has the edge over the guy, famous for hunting down mages. Still, it kinda fits. Kiritsugu himself admitted during the Fourth Grail War that Assassin was the class he vibed with the most because it matches his sneaky, tactical fighting style. So he's probably not losing sleep over it. That said, Assassins are designed to target masters, who are usually mages. So, technically, his title still checks out. It's just that, thanks to gameplay mechanics, he can't fully live up to his Magus Killer rep. Next up, Robin Hood. In his legend, Robin's the ultimate bandit hero, stealing from corrupt nobles and fighting against the system. He's also not exactly a fan of knighthood or chivalry, probably because he's seen how the whole noble knight act is just a front for protecting shady officials. The irony. In FGO, he's summoned as an archer, which is in the knight class. Yep, the dude who hates knights is technically one of them now. That's hilarious. And if that wasn't enough, his whole legend is about taking down corrupt rulers, but in most events, he gets stuck as a sidekick to tyrannical women like Ibaraki, Elizabeth, and BB. Poor guy just can't catch a break. Those were some of my favorite ironic moments or aspects in FGO. Of course, there are plenty more, like Hector, famously called Hector of the Shining Helmet. Yet none of his ascensions actually have him wearing a helmet. It only shows up in his Bond CE. Or how Martha, even though she hates Christmas, ends up becoming Santa herself. And the list goes on, but like I said earlier, I'm just focusing on a few of my personal favorites, the hilariously ironic ones. Plus, I wanted to kick off my first video of 2025 with something fun and lighthearted. What about you guys? Any ironic FGO moments that had you shaking your head? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.